Welcome to The Explainer. If you've ever wondered what separates businesses that actually thrive from the ones that, just quietly bleed money, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to dive straight into the true financial mechanics of running a business, looking right at its fundamental anatomy.
We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We'll start with the hidden costs of business, break down fixed versus variable costs, look at the shape of average costs, see what happens when marginal meets average, and finally, track total business revenue. Let's get right into it.
So, to start us off, what do you actually sacrifice when you start a company? See, it is super easy to just look at the receipts, right? But the true cost of running a business is far, far more than just the cash leaving your bank account.
Section 1. The hidden costs of business. What you pay out and what you give up.
Okay, so every business has explicit costs. These are your obvious expenses, the actual cash you hand over to outside owners for things like factory rent, machinery, and employee salaries. But then, on the flip side, you have implicit costs. These are the hidden opportunity costs of using your own resources. Like, if you use a building you already own for your factory, you're giving up the rent you could have made leasing it to someone else. Or think about the salary you could have made just working a regular corporate job. That lost salary? That's an implicit cost.
The best way to think about this is like a giant iceberg. True economic cost is the whole thing. Those explicit accounting costs, that's just the tip visible above the water. The massive, dangerous block of ice hiding below the surface represents your implicit costs. To get your total economic cost, you have to add both of them together. And there is one very specific implicit cost lurking down there that we absolutely cannot ignore.
And that is called normal profit. Now, I know treating profit as a cost sounds totally backwards, but stick with me. Think of normal profit as the absolute minimum salary the entrepreneur has to pay themselves just to stay in the game. If you don't make this bare minimum, you're just going to quit and go do your next best alternative, right? So, in economics, this normal profit is treated as a necessary implicit cost just to keep the doors open.
Now, if we zoom out from the individual company to society at large, the picture gets even bigger. See, a firm's private economic math only includes their own explicit and implicit costs. It completely ignores external costs, like an oil refinery polluting a nearby river, for instance. When we add those external costs borne by society to the firm's private costs, then we finally find the true social cost.
Section 2. Fixed versus variable costs in the short run.
In the short run, your business operates with two main types of inputs. First, you have unavoidable overheads like factory rent and permanent staff salaries. These are your total fixed costs. They literally do not change whether you produce 1 unit or 1,000,000. Second, you have total variable costs, things like raw materials and hourly labor. These rise and fall directly with your production. Naturally, you add them together and you get your total cost.
So, how do these actually behave as your output increases? Let's map it out visually so we can see what's happening.
Think of total fixed cost as a perfectly flat horizontal line. It stays exactly the same even if you are producing zero output. Your total variable cost, though, starts at zero and curves upward as you make more stuff. And that total cost curve, it perfectly tracks the variable curve, but it starts higher up. It always stays exactly one fixed cost distance above the variable line no matter what.
Section 3. The shape of average costs and why they form a U.
The absolute most crucial point here is that classic U-shape. In the short run, this is caused by the law of variable proportions. But in the long run, this U-shape becomes even more vital to understand. Imagine you start a smartphone company in a tiny garage. Your rent and machine costs per phone are really high. But then you scale up. You upgrade to a giant automated factory. You start bulk buying microchips. And suddenly your cost per phone drops from 20,000 down to just 8,000 rupees. That downward slope? That's what we call internal economies of scale. Your per unit costs fall as output expands because you're gaining massive efficiencies.
Eventually, you hit the absolute bottom of that U, the optimum point of production. This is peak efficiency. Your factory is running at perfect capacity, making phones at the absolute cheapest costs possible. But you have to watch out for the overexpansion trap. Let's say you try to build 10 more mega factories across 5 continents, but you don't hire enough managers. Communication breaks down, shipping gets delayed, red tape builds up everywhere, and suddenly your cost per phone shoots right back up to 14,000 rupees. That upward slope is internal diseconomies of scale. The interplay of those two forces, economics driving costs down and diseconomies pulling them up, is exactly what creates that classic U-shape for the long-run average cost curve.
Also, you'll notice how the gap between average total cost and average variable cost shrinks as you produce more. That's simply because your fixed overhead is getting diluted over more and more units. It becomes a tiny percentage of the total. But crucially, those two curves will never, ever touch. Why? Because your fixed cost, no matter how thinly you spread it out, can never truly be zero.
Section 4. When marginal meets average.
So marginal cost is just the cost of producing exactly one additional unit. And the way it behaves is basically like a giant magnet. It dictates the overall direction of your average cost curve.
The absolute golden rule to remember here is this. When the cost of the next unit is less than the average, it drags the average down. When it's more, it pulls the average up. Because of this, that U-shaped marginal cost curve will always violently pull the average cost towards it, and it will perfectly cut through the average cost curve from below, right at its absolute minimum point. Every single time.
Section 5. Tracking total business revenue and surviving market conditions.
Costs are really only half the battle, right? Imagine a perfectly competitive market where you're just one tiny player, and you have absolutely no power to dictate prices. The price is constant, it's locked in. Because of this, your average revenue and your marginal revenue, the actual cash you get from each extra unit you sell, they stay exactly the same at every single level of output. But under imperfect competition, like a monopoly for instance, the whole dynamic completely shifts. To sell more products, you literally have to drop the price. Because you have to lower the price on all your units just to sell one extra unit, your marginal revenue actually ends up falling twice as fast as your average revenue. It's a tough reality to navigate. So, when we take a step back, the living, breathing anatomy of a business is just this constant, delicate balancing act. You're forever managing those U-shaped cost constraints on the production side, while simultaneously trying to survive the harsh revenue realities of your specific market on the sales side.
Which leaves us with a pretty critical question for any aspiring entrepreneur, or honestly, anyone trying to truly understand how businesses survive. When you look at your own ventures, are you actually making a true economic profit, or are you just ignoring that massive iceberg of implicit costs hiding beneath the surface? Take a hard look at what you're giving up and make sure your normal profit isn't secretly sinking your ship. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.